If everything goes according to plan, 4th November 2022 will see the release of The Flash. Starring Ezra Miller and directed by Andy Muschietti, in what is to be a continuation of Warner Bros. DC Extended Universe. Inspired by elements from the Flashpoint comic book storyline, in which time travel plays a central role, the film is to explore DC's multiverse and will feature Supergirl and Batman. In fact, there'll be more than one Batman, as the movie intends to see the return of Ben Affleck's Batman and Michael Keaton's Batman, in an exciting move that looks to be bringing past DC adaptations into the existing canon and opens the door to an infinite future of possibilities. The road leading up to the imminent release was as long as it was winding, and to cover the many canceled and previously abandoned efforts to bring a Flash to the cinema screen will be a race through a timeline of events and history at approximately 2,532 miles per hour. In January 1940, audiences were introduced to the fastest man alive, as Flash Comics Issue 1 brought us the origin and first appearance of Jay Garrick, the original Flash, in a story by writer Gardner Fox and artist Harry Lampert, in what is now regarded as comics' golden age. In the 1950s, the comic book industry faced a decline in popularity as tastes were changing. The days of gritty crime tales and social commentary were now unwelcome. In a world that enjoyed Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck, lighter, happier adventures were now seen as the way to go in a post-war society, as comic books were burned in coordinated gatherings that were designed to save the children. DC Comics would regroup, brush itself down, and launch Showcase, in which comic artists and writers could test the launch of one new character in each issue. This would herald the dawn of the Silver Age of comic books, and Showcase number 4, 8, and 13 would see the resurrection of the Flash character, now reinvented to be relevant in America's new jet age of aviation and turbine engines. The new Flash was police scientist Barry Allen. His origin shows him doused from a spill of toxic chemicals during a storm. Allen is hit by lightning and gains the power of super speed. Allen takes on the alter ego of the Flash after reading the Golden Age comic book recounting the heroism of Jay Garrick. Barry Allen would also have a love interest in the form of reporter Iris West. He creates a costume which contracts and hides in the ring he wears on his finger. The look of the superhero was redesigned by artist Carmine Infantino, who had contributed to the original Flash comics. Sales went through the roof, and The Flash was a huge success. The title helped turn an industry around, leading the way for revivals of other dormant characters. The rights to the character had been held by National Comics Publications, known as NCP, and Detective Comics. The two companies would merge under the name of Superman DC, before the next rebranding that would see everything go under the umbrella of DC Comics. In 1967, NCP had been purchased by the conglomerate Kinney National Company, which would also purchase Warner Bros. 7 Arts 2 years later. This now meant that Warner Bros. Publishing was the parent company of all DC Comics titles and characters, including The Flash. In 1989, all of Warner Publishing's assets would move over to Warner Bros. Film and Television Studio. DC Comics now found itself directly attached to an international media machine, with the means to put its characters in feature-length live-action films. The 1950s and 60s had previously seen adaptations of Superman and Batman television shows. 1974 would see Alexander Salkind buy the rights for what would become the Richard Donner masterpiece Superman, starring Christopher Reeve. This had been a negative pickup deal, meaning that Warner Bros. Had agreed to buy back the finished film once the producer was finished with it. Years-long development of a Batman motion picture would finally see the movie hit the screens in 1989 and forever change the cinematic landscape. Leading into the early 90s, which would then see Warner Animation eagerly commission Batman the Animated Series, a truly seminal piece of work that would later lead to Superman the Animated Series, whilst Warner Television would develop the romantic action comedy Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman for a television premiere in 1993. A few years earlier, immediately following the integration of Warner Publishing, the studio would commission multiple writers and multiple projects to see what DC characters would attract an audience when brought to television. When searching for talent to translate superheroes from page to screen, Warner Brothers would turn to the creative duo Danny Bilson and Paul DeMeo. The pair had spent 6 years and endless revisions, pitching, writing, and developing what would become Joe Johnston's 1991 film, The Rocketeer, based on Dave Stevens' comic book hero. Bilson and DeMeo would then set to work on writing the eventually canceled pilot episode of Unlimited Powers, which would feature Barry Allen, Wally West, Selina Kyle, Wonder Woman, Green Arrow, Dr. Occult, and the Green Lantern. Unlimited Powers would open with Barry Allen, the Flash, in his mid-40s, as he escapes from a 15-year-long suspended animation prison sentence. He runs out into an oppressive dystopian central city, which is now a virtual police state. The Flash is declared a wanted man and is now at a stage where he experiences fatigue when he uses his powers. His age is catching up with him, and his body has outrun his mind. Superpowers are outlawed as the Limited Powers Act was enacted, a worldwide political movement that forced superheroes to retire in exchange for world peace. The Green Lantern is now reduced to hustling on the streets and reduced to cashing in on his reputation to make a fast dollar. Dr. Occult, aka the Ghost Detective, once a private investigator who specialized in cases involving the supernatural, is now charging $10 on Peddler's Row to give customers psychic readings. The word on the street is, the Flash is back and is now a fugitive. The corrupt governor is the villain Icicle. He and his companion, Selina Kyle, are unconcerned by the Flash's escape and continue with their plans to oppress the populace. In this world, Batman has long since retired and receded from society, and Superman has disappeared to live out his life in a far-off, distant galaxy. Diana Prince, aka Wonder Woman, is now an overworked waitress who has fallen hard from grace. The former Kid Flash, Wally West, is now a middle-aged corporate employee, and his once great feats are now nothing more than nostalgic memories. The Flash uncovers a nationwide conspiracy that supervillains are secretly controlling the Earth at a political level. He teams up with the Green Arrow's daughter to unite the once great heroes, and the story becomes a classic tale of good versus evil. The Watchmen-style take on the DC heroes was encouraged by the younger executives at CBS, but was ultimately rejected by the senior decision-makers as it was seen as too radical a departure from the source and lacked the recognition factors with which the audience was familiar. Bilson would later say, "One of the things that has proven true over time is that the stuff we couldn't get done, somebody did it later. There was this weird thing where we were always a little bit too far ahead of the curve or something, but it is what it is. It was what it was." Despite the rejection of Unlimited Powers, it was seen that there was a lot of potential in the character of the Flash, and the two writers were then asked to work on a solo Flash project. The pair were told to just play it straight, don't modify the material, just keep it as is. Their script was completed in January 1990. The TV show The Flash, starring John Wesley Shipp as Alan, would see its debut on air in September 1990. Despite the premature cancellation of the show, it remains somewhat of a cult classic and is still revisited by generations of fans who weren't even born at the time it was made. Another project that went nowhere, first developed in 1987, was another take on The Flash, with a screenplay by Jim Strain, the future co-writer of Jumanji, with a story credit by Todd Holland, director of the classic movie Wizard. The story would see Barry Allen studying strange, spherical-shaped metals that had fallen from a hovering spacecraft during a meteor shower which hid a UFO visitation. The energy from one of the fallen spheres that flanked the craft gives Barry his superpowers. The script includes a shape-shifting alien that can emulate humans to blend in as he tracks down the missing pieces of the craft. Barry comes to terms with his new abilities and becomes the Flash, and eventually faces off against the villainous alien. He lures it into a trap that results in an explosion of power and energy. The hero saves the day and gets the girl. In 1991, there were unsourced rumors that Michael J. Fox was the choice of Warner Brothers to star as the Flash, in a movie that was planned as a high-budget production by John Peters and Peter Guber, who had earlier hit gold with Batman. The writer of Teen Wolf, Joseph Loeb, was hired to submit a treatment of which little is known. The project never left the starting blocks. Loeb would then immediately begin work on a revival of the 1950 series Challengers of the Unknown. On Friday, December 19, 2004, It was announced in the trades that David S.Goyer, whose credits at that point included Blade and Batman Begins, would be writing a big-budget, big-screen The Flash for Warner Brothers. Goyer would say a day before the announcement that, "They came to me and said, 'You did a great job on Batman. The next big one we want to get up and running is The Flash or Green Lantern. Are you interested?' I said I would love to do The Flash. I think there's a lot of cinematic possibilities that nobody's ever done. I'm interested in really pushing it and dealing with relativity. So near the end of the story, he's going to be arriving before he left, and all sorts of weird and cute little stuff. It's going to be a lot lighter than Batman or Blade. We're going to use Wally West. I'm just writing it, but I would love to have Ryan Reynolds play Wally West."
So they came to me and said, which was fun, especially for a comic book geek like me, and said, "Any DC character you want, what do you want to do? We want to do another."
Right.
They were primarily pushing Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, or The Flash. I had no particular love for Wonder Woman. And I just thought The Flash would be fun, and that no one had really exploited those powers, you know, cinematically yet. So that's what I'm working on right now.
And when you sit down and begin to write a movie like The Flash or any movie that you've worked on, do you think in pictures first and then words, or words first?
In the case of The Flash, the first thing I did was just sat down, locked myself in a room for a week, and just reread everything I could possibly reread. And I did two things. A, I made a list of just cool moments or lines in no particular order that I just thought had to be in the movie. And then I also made a list of, you know, what, if you boil The Flash, or you boil Batman down, or you boil Blade down, what are the elements that absolutely have to be there? In the case of The Flash, I had to do the same thing and figure out what's the metaphor, what's the theme of this movie. And what I decided for The Flash, should we be fortunate enough to make it, is it's the Icarus myth in a way, that speed is the only modern vice. You know, there's all these vices that exist time immemorial, but speed is something relatively new, and it's addictive. And you know, if you run too fast, you'll run yourself literally out of existence, but you'll also sort of won't be able to stop and smell the roses, and you'll leave the people you love behind. And so that's sort of the emotional core of what I'm trying to do with The Flash.
It seems that Goyer would be using The Flash Volume 2 as his source, the series that would indeed focus on the third Flash, as stated, Wally West. To summarize the screenplay briefly, the film starts with Wally West running at super speed. A voiceover explains that before his Uncle Barry had died, the Flash was an urban legend. He says the experts were wrong, and if you run fast enough through time, anything's possible. Time can bend, and even stop. We cut to 12 years earlier and see a plot that begins with Barry Allen as the Flash. We see that Barry and Iris are happily married. Barry develops a fatherly bond with his nephew Wally. His best friend is Hunter Zolomon. Wally witnesses the death of his uncle during a fight with Victor Vesp. We learn that Vesp had constructed a plan to steal the Flash's powers, but it backfired, causing a detonation that strikes both himself and a nearby Wally with light. The explosion kills Barry. Another lightning strike years later seems to trigger Wally's powers. Wally figures out his abilities in a series of tests at Star Labs. Wally is encouraged by his Aunt Iris to be responsible and to honor his uncle's legacy, but instead, as he feels he lives in Barry's shadow, he misuses his powers and attracts notoriety and publicity. Victor Vesp, now also known as the Turtle, escapes from prison with the help of Zoom, another speedster, who later turns out to be Hunter Zolomon. He wears a costume like the Flash, but his is red and gold. Wally is accused of causing the damage that the villainous Zoom has caused, as Vesp unleashes him onto the world. The Turtle plans to recreate his initial scheme of stealing the Flash's powers, this time targeting Wally. Zoom kills Vesp by zapping him with sparks from his fingertips. He realizes that when he was first selected for experimentation by Vesp, it was all manipulation. He was used as a pawn. Wally loops backwards in time. He enters the Speed Force and witnesses the death of Barry all over again. Wally shares a moment with Barry, who explains that he is now trapped in the Speed Force and that it was Vesp who sold them out. Wally is distraught. He doesn't want to lose his uncle for a second time. "I'll get you out of here," he says. Barry nods. He wishes that was true. "Just tell Iris I love her, will you?" And then Barry focuses his energy and Wally is returned to the present. He does battle with Zoom. The two clash and speed through time and space in a chaotic blur. They circle the entire globe, whipping up hurricanes that threaten to engulf and tear apart the whole world. Wally concentrates all of his speed and unleashes lightning upon Zoom, tearing him apart. Zoom dies, and we end with Wally, now mature and assured. He chooses to step up and accept his responsibility and legacy as the new Flash, the fastest man alive. On the same day, it was announced Joss Whedon's proposed Wonder Woman movie had been canceled. Goyer, after 3 years on The Flash, would put out a post on his personal blog stating, "Well, I've been waiting a few months to relate this news, but I'm sad to say that my vision of The Flash is dead at Warner Brothers. The God's honest truth is that Warner Brothers and myself simply couldn't agree on what would make for a cool Flash film. I'm quite proud of the screenplay I turned in. I threw my heart into it, and I genuinely think it would have been the basis of a groundbreaking film. But as of now, the studio is heading off in a completely different direction. I expect you'll hear some new developments on that front shortly." Goyer would also say of his decision that, "When you start out, you just want to get a job, or you just want to get a movie made, or things like that. I reached a point, I don't know how many years ago, where if I got a set of notes that I really didn't believe in, I wouldn't do it. So then either I walk, or I don't walk, or something like that. The Flash, I still have a great relationship with Warner Brothers. I turned around a month later and sold them Green Arrow Supermax. It just became apparent that we wanted to do two different stories." With Goyer onto other projects, Warner would immediately announce Justice League Mortal, written by Kiernan and Michelle Mulroney, with George Miller eventually signed on as director. The planned big screen team-up of Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, Flash, Green Lantern, and Martian Manhunter would create a little confusion as to what cinematic continuity this was going to be set in, as at the time, Batman and Superman film franchises had already been established, with Christian Bale in Christopher Nolan's movies, and Brandon Routh had already portrayed the Man of Tomorrow in Bryan Singer's Superman Returns, which at the time was all set up for a sequel. Justice League Mortal was fast-tracked into pre-production, with a projected budget of $220 million. Taking inspiration from the comic book storylines JLA Tower of Babel, which deals with Batman's perceived betrayal of the superhuman community by keeping and concealing hidden records concerning the strengths and weaknesses of his allies, which details contingency plans on how Batman could neutralize and defeat his friends should such a need ever arise. Of course, the files get into the wrong hands, which would kickstart the catalyst for the plot. The writers would also derive inspiration from the OMAC Project storyline. The miniseries portrays Brother Eye as an artificially intelligent spy satellite originally built by Batman to observe the members of the Justice League. Maxwell Lord had previously secretly captured Brother Eye from Batman and used the satellite to coordinate the OMACs that Lord now controls. Another influential source would be Superman's Sacrifice, in which Superman is mind-warped and controlled by Maxwell Lord into seeing his closest friends as his greatest enemies. The book, like the OMAC Project, is one of 4 miniseries leading up to DC Comics' Infinite Crisis event, which tells of a multiversal catastrophe that results in the destruction of countless parallel universes and the recreation of a single universe. For the planned Justice League movie, actor Adam Brody was selected to portray Barry Allen, the Flash. Filming was supposed to start in February 2008 in Australia, but in January 2008, Warner Brothers announced that the film was on indefinite hold, allowing the options to lapse for the cast. Concept art and costumes for Brody's Flash were made as the movie was literally on the verge of starting principal photography. The studio were said to have felt that the script needed perfecting, which was now impossible because of the impending Writers Guild of America strike. George Miller's canceled Justice League Mortal is still one of the most endlessly repeated subjects in comic book movie history. The script is online, and with the same talking points recycled for over a decade now, there isn't really anything new to add to the conversation at this point. Filmmaker Ryan Unicombe, who worked to obtain much of the concept art that's out there, is currently working on a documentary that promises to go deep into the subject of Justice League Mortal. The documentary hopes to see eventual release under the official title, 7 Friends, George Miller's Justice League. In terms of the Flash's function within the plot, the script was very Flash prominent, featuring both Barry Allen and Wally West. Barry Allen was the film's main point of view and sense of humor, as he stands in awe of the assembled superheroes around him. At the end of the film, Barry Allen would sacrifice himself to defeat Maxwell Lord. Wally West would then adopt the mantle of the Flash and join the Justice League in his place. The new recruit then joins the team as they're off to fight the villain, Starro. In hindsight, it genuinely is one of the great what-ifs of unmade superhero movie adaptations, and the script is arguably the greatest testament to fan service we would have ever seen. Adam Brody, who would have played the Flash, would later say, "I did realize how fantastic it could have been. I've said this before, but the script was very good. The draft I read was very good. Game-changing? No. Just very solid and fulfilling. It had the perfect tone, I thought. It captured exactly what you want out of this movie, and everyone was cast fantastically for their roles. Then, the writer's strike happened. So they asked for this kitchen sink draft because no one was going to be able to do rewrites for the foreseeable future. So they're just like, look, write every idea you have in this script. That's the one we'll go off, and then we'll pare it back. So we got there, and the script was 40 pages longer, and all for the worse. You pulled on too many threads, and it was a fair amount messier." And he told MTV that, "We were in Australia for some table reads and fittings and whatnot for a few weeks with George Miller and his camp. And that was a great experience. I don't regret a second of it. I had a really good time, and a lot of positive things came from that."
But what can you tell us? So, like, what do you remember about that experience the first time around? Was that a major drag when that didn't pan out?
Yes. However, and in hindsight, I should have been more bummed. I really liked it, but I just kind of felt like, no big deal. The next thing, and then it kind of did, but it kind of didn't. Nothing like that came along again. Yeah. But I, at the time, I'll say this: the script was really good. It was it's not that it was revolutionary, but it just, and I'm pretty objective about this kind of thing, and I think I have a pretty good gauge of scripts. And it was very solid, and they cast it. I thought the casting was right, not just myself, but like everyone tonally is going to fit right. And I mean, I was so excited to work with George Miller, and at the same time, because he was a legend and he was very nice. Yeah. But at the same time, I didn't have any idea. I bet Warner Brothers didn't have any idea what a fucking badass he still was, because he hadn't made a live-action movie in like 15 years. Yeah. He'd made like Babe 2 was the more and Happy Feet. Yeah. And so, yeah, he's the like Australian Spielberg, but who knows? And then, you see Mad Max Down, and you're like, oh my God, he's as fresh as anyone. I mean, he's ahead of the curve. I mean, so... in hindsight, it hurts more, actually, because I'm like, that would have been a classic movie.
After seeing what he did.
After seeing what he did, and knowing the script, and knowing knowing the actors involved, and I think it would have been amazing. Also, I will say that although in this version, I was very well suited to this script's version of The Flash, and I grew up reading comics. I read them a lot, even in my 20s, love them, know a lot about that stuff. I was never actually a Flash reader or fan, so I didn't have a particular affinity for that part. It didn't kill me in that way, but it was written, we would have been a nice match very well. And I swear in hindsight, it hurts more than it did at the time. At the time, I was like, it was also a slow fade out, because it was like, 2 weeks, okay, they lost the tax credit, there's the writer's strike, we're going to go back after Christmas, we were there for 2 weeks, and then it was like, go back because it's Christmas, and then we'll all come back out in 2 weeks and 3 weeks and get going. And then, okay, well, maybe it's going to be a week later, okay, well, the writer's strike, and then it kind of faded out. It wasn't like we were all there and then got our, got our pink slips or something. Yeah. So,
yeah.
Warner Brothers still owned Goyer's screenplay, and it was set to serve as a jumping-off point for future writers and filmmakers. As soon as Goyer moved on to Green Arrow, Warner Brothers hired Chris Brancato, the writer of Brooklyn's Finest, to write the movie. To sum it up, Brancato's second draft, dated September 2007. Wally West is a jaded punk kid on the wrong side of the law. He steals cars for kicks, and he thinks the Flash and the notion of superheroics is lame. Barry tries to mentor his nephew and put him on the right track, to teach him to take responsibility for his actions and their consequences. Barry later dies in a fire at the police station where he works. Wally attempts to save him and is doused in chemicals doing so. We cut to a decade later. Wally is a brooding, speed-addicted motocross racer with a bad attitude. As Wally and his Aunt Iris spend time together, they're caught in a lightning storm. Iris dies, but not before telling Wally of his Uncle Barry's secret identity. Wally suddenly begins to move through time at an accelerated speed with no knowledge as to why or how. After his aunt's funeral, he discovers Barry's original suit contained within his ring. Wally now tests out his capabilities. He learns that he even has the potential to reverse time. He learns that both his uncle and aunt were murdered in a conspiracy. He travels back in time, receives training from Barry, and flashes forward to the present where he tracks the bad guy, the mayor of Keystone, a man named Vandal Savage, who is also the owner of the Savage Energy Company. The weather has become an apocalyptic symphony of elemental chaos. The immortal Savage has concocted a diabolical plot to destroy the world in order to remold it. He envisions a Garden of Eden-like scenario, where he and his mistress Valeria can repopulate the human race. Savage aims to usher in a new dawn of humanity by manipulating the weather to stir up tidal waves, floods, and mega cyclones. Wally is now in complete command of his own powers. He can run on air, he can move across water and pass through solid walls using vibration. He counteracts the storms by creating his own cyclones, and the hero and villain face off. Wally saves the city from a wave of bombs that are detonated as they fall from the sky. With Savage finally dead, he embraces his true calling as the Flash. Director Shawn Levy, who had just made Night at the Museum, had been hired to direct the Brancato script. The proposed movie wouldn't progress though. The director would later tell Collider that, "I was attached to the Flash. After Night at the Museum, I got offered the Flash. I was like, well, first of all, what? Why? I know Night at the Museum was a big commercial movie and had a lot of visual effects, but look, I love the Flash. Mostly because it was this nickname I had in my youth. And I liked it because I liked the comics, and I was really into running fast. It's geeky." Attached to the Flash, I oversaw a draft for about 3.5 months. And at that time, I learned 2 things. 1, if you're going to take on a character like that, I was still a family comedy guy. And I just felt like I got a few more under my belt before I can claim the legitimacy of making a movie like that. In the end, the Flash went away because Justice League was going to happen. And then it didn't happen. To my great dismay, because I would have been first in line for that too. The truth is, we never got the Flash script right. I still love that character. As Levy left the project, he was instantly replaced with director David Dobkin, who had made Shanghai Nights and The Wedding Crashers. Warner Brothers were still at this point hoping Justice League Mortal would get off the ground eventually, and then potentially spawn solo movies for each member of the Justice League. Plans for a spin-off Flash movie, now set to tie in with a Justice League Mortal shared universe, were made immediately. Actor Ryan Reynolds around this time would also publicly express interest in the role. When MTV spoke to Dobkin about his potential vision, he said, "It's designed to work as a spin-off from Justice League of America. So we're honoring the story, and we're working in tandem with the storytelling. I think we'll just have to see how the movie does and how it works off it, but it certainly would be a movie that comes after Justice League." Dobkin also hinted that the tagline will be, "You can't outrun yourself." Writer Craig Wright, who had worked on Lost and 6 Feet Under, was announced as the latest screenwriter to have a go at writing a camera-ready script. At this point, Warner Brothers were in 2 minds over which way to progress with their stable of DC characters. The main issue, it seemed, was over how to pitch the film tonally. Going back and forth from lighter to darker, executives were now distracted by the success of The Dark Knight Rises. The final installment of Nolan's brooding trilogy had opened to lucrative box office takings. The Dobkin and Wright collaboration would amount to nothing, and so in 2009, future DC president and then comic book writer, would plot out a treatment of his own. Johns had previously written a celebrated run on the Flash comic books and was responsible for 2009's Flash Rebirth. And now, writer Dan Mazeau was confirmed to be writing a Flash screenplay from Johns' treatment. Mazeau had previously written an unproduced Johnny Quest script for the studio that had received high praise, and it was the Johnny Quest script that got him hired for The Flash. Stories were then printed that there were issues over the rights, and that the new movie may not be ready for a while yet, and so writer Mazeau would contact IGN and say, "Just to chime in on your latest article, The Flash has not been hobbled. Everything is moving forward as planned. I'm still writing the script. Geoff Johns is still consulting. Flash fans have no cause for concern, and in my opinion, lots to be excited about." So now it seemed that everything was back on track yet again. Mazeau would give interviews and say, Warner Brothers is in the process of figuring out what their method is for releasing their superhero movies. They had Green Lantern come out, and I think Flash is high on the list of what would be next. It's a matter of a lot of things coming together, the right story and the right filmmaker, and the right sort of visual approach to Flash, because he can't just be a guy who runs fast. He said the script would feature the Silver Age version of the character and how that had been important to him while he was writing his script. A year would pass without any official updates, and some of that initial cause for excitement was starting to perhaps now fade a little. Then on June 9, 2010, Green Lantern writers Greg Berlanti, Michael Green, and Mark Guggenheim were hired to write a Flash script alongside a Green Lantern sequel. The Flash screenplay would still apparently be based on the recent run by Geoff Johns and would feature Barry Allen as the Flash. This version would have also potentially been a crossover with the just-released Green Lantern. To outline basic plot beats, the script introduces us to forensic crime analyst Barry Allen. Barry arrives at a crime scene where it appears an unidentified woman has been murdered by being frozen to death. Barry has theories on what is happening, and when investigating the data on the case, a window blows open, and he is hit by lightning and doused in chemicals. As Barry awakes in Star Labs, he meets the CEO of the company, a man named Eobard Thawne. We see flashbacks and learn how his mother was murdered and his father, who has since died in prison, was framed and subsequently charged with the crime. Barry was then adopted by the Wests, the parents of his childhood friend Iris. The accident seems to have granted him superhuman abilities, and Star Labs helps him control and understand his abilities. Eobard Thawne monitors Barry and promises to help him. He tells Barry that the lightning that struck him was created by the malfunction of an experimental particle accelerator built by him. Thawne mentors Barry on how to control his powers and reveals his plans to use the particle accelerator to explore the multiverse. During these tests, Barry's capabilities are measured and tested. Barry outruns a jet dragster. He heals fractured bones in hours. He even reverses a nearby tornado by running counter to its flow. We then learn that a serial killer is on the loose. The suspect is Leonard Snart, a man who, as a child, witnessed his family perish in a house fire and became obsessed with the cold. The press nicknamed the killer Cold on account of his modus operandi. Barry teams up with Iris to try and prevent the next victims. Cold then announces he will destroy a landmark. The train station is freezing over with black ice. Windows shatter. Bombs are planted on the tracks, and the Flash evacuates people one by one in a blur. We eventually find out that Cold has been hired by another speedster, a Reverse Flash, the real killer of Barry's parents. He reveals that he killed Barry's mother and framed his father because he comes from a parallel universe where Barry has defeated him many times over. His plan was to then cross dimensions and engineer the accident that would transform Barry into the Flash, and that now his plan is to steal Barry's speed using the particle accelerator and destroy the entire universe. His plan is to repeat the act over and over throughout the multiverse until history is rewritten and Barry is erased from every existence. The Reverse Flash triggers the particle accelerator, creating a black hole which Barry has to stop. Cold is under orders to kill Iris. Barry saves her. He deflects the attacks, and Cold dies. We learn the Reverse Flash is secretly Eobard Thawne. Barry then fights Thawne in a battle that takes them toward the multiverse, where Barry glimpses multiple realities, including one where his parents are alive and well. The particle accelerator creates a singularity that threatens to engulf the entire city, but Barry unravels it by running counter to its flow, as he did with the tornado. Thawne then attacks him, and they are pulled into the Speed Force, where Barry finally defeats and leaves him trapped there forever. Barry and Iris then reunite. The city begins a rebuild, and Barry vows to fight crime as the Flash. A post-credit sequence would also see an appearance from Ryan Reynolds' Hal Jordan, who upon seeing Barry in action quips, "Light speed, not bad." Writer Guggenheim would say, "The Flash, to me, is about pure expression. Flash is untethered to the limitations of time and space. He can be everywhere at once, and with that, I think, comes a certain freedom. Who hasn't wanted to be faster, to get someplace quicker?" Berlanti would say of the approach that, "Though Barry Allen was a little lighter in the comic, I think because of the nature that he was a CSI and moved in this world of crime before this stuff happened. I think it's tonally somewhere in between Green Lantern and Dark Knight. It's actually a little bit darker than when we were working on Green Lantern, because you're dealing with somebody who is already a crime fighter in a world of those kinds of criminals and that kind of murder and homicide." Berlanti would later develop television's Arrowverse, and 2014's The Flash TV show would incorporate elements of this screenplay across season 1 of the show. All plans would yet again start from scratch, as across 2013 and 2014, Warner Brothers began to establish a DC cinematic universe in a move that was seen as designed to compete with Marvel's super successful cinematic universe. After Zack Snyder's Superman reboot, Man of Steel was considered a success, plans were made for a further 5 films, all to be directed by Snyder. Those plans were then revised, and Warner Brothers would announce to stockholders that a whole slate of movies was now planned. The Flash, at first scheduled for a 2016 release, was now pushed back to 2018. In June 2013, Warner Brothers announced that director Zack Snyder and screenwriter David S.Goyer would return for a Man of Steel sequel. The following month, Snyder confirmed at San Diego Comic-Con that the follow-up to Man of Steel would feature Superman and Batman meeting for the first time on film. Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice then entered pre-production, and would then officially kickstart the shared universe and introduce viewers to the rest of the heroes that were set to star in their own individual features. The Flash was scheduled to appear in Dawn of Justice in a fleeting cameo. In October 2014, the star of We Need to Talk About Kevin, Ezra Miller, had been cast in the role of the Flash, although the solo movie was yet to have a writer or director attached. In April 2015, it was announced that Phil Lord and Christopher Miller, makers of the Lego Movie and the Lego Batman movie, were in talks to write a treatment. News then followed that Seth Grahame-Smith was hired to write his own screenplay based off Lord and Miller's treatment, for what was to be his directorial debut. The attachment didn't last too long, as less than a year later, Grahame-Smith was off the project as director, with Warner Brothers said to be retaining his screenplay. No real reason for the parting of ways was given, as creative differences is all that was said, although studio sources would later hint that the real reason was down to the fact Batman v Superman had opened strongly, before takings started to sharply drop off, and Warner Brothers were now re-examining each solo movie a lot more closely, and felt that Grahame-Smith's inexperience behind the camera was too much of a gamble when it came to steering a major production. This was the same month that Snyder began shooting Justice League, in which Miller was to co-star as the Flash. A few weeks later, Warner would recruit the director of the movie Dope, Rick Famuyiwa. Famuyiwa would spend 5 months developing his ideas, during which time he would cast Billy Crudup as Barry Allen's father and Kiersey Clemons as Iris West. Upon his departure, he would tell The Hollywood Reporter that, "When I was approached by Warner Brothers in DC about the possibility of directing The Flash, I was excited about the opportunity to enter this amazing world of characters that I loved growing up and still do to this day. I was also excited to work with Ezra Miller, who is a phenomenal young actor. I pitched a version of the film in line with my voice, humor, and heart. While it's disappointing that we couldn't come together creatively on the project, I remain grateful for the opportunity. I will continue to look for opportunities to tell stories that speak to a fresh, generational, topical, and multicultural point of view. I wish Warner Brothers, DC, John Berg, Geoff Johns, and Ezra Miller all the best as they continue their journey into the Speed Force. Famuyiwa had written the latest draft, and sources would tell Variety that the only reason for his departure had to do with executives disagreeing with where he had taken the script. So now, without a director yet again, Warner Brothers would put the production on a temporary hold and make the decision to throw out the existing script, all of its modifications, and instead simply start again. Fans would then see an official image of the Justice League movie, showing Miller's Flash standing alongside Batman and Wonder Woman. 4 more months would pass without any director. Sam Raimi, Mark Webb, and Jordan Peele would all pass on the offer to direct. The Hollywood trades were now reporting that Warner Brothers were very close to making a choice and had whittled their shortlist down to the last 2 names: Matthew Vaughn, the director of Layer Cake and Kick-Ass, and Robert Zemeckis, the director of Forrest Gump, Castaway, and of course, the Back to the Future trilogy. Zemeckis was looking to be facing a schedule clash, and Vaughn, who took a meeting and expressed interest in The Flash, was said to be more interested in making a third Kingsman movie with Fox. Neither director would commit to Warner's intended release date, and nothing would come of the idea. Warner Brothers then pushed back the start of filming. It had been expected to begin shooting that March. The script was still being tweaked, and the studio didn't think there was enough time to get it in shape in order for the film to make its original start date. The standalone Flash film, now retitled Flashpoint, was still without a director and was now pushed back again, this time to a 2021 release. Ben Affleck was offered the director's chair but would pass. And so in January 2018, Spider-Man Homecoming writers John Francis Daley and Jonathan Goldstein entered negotiations to direct. Daley and Goldstein were hired, although their tenure was short-lived. It seemed the directors and the star had a conflict over the tonal direction of the piece, and so the would-be directors would exit. Alleged insiders would anonymously state that Miller wanted to go dark with the material, but the studio remit was to go light. The creative duo would later give interviews about The Flash. Goldstein would later say, "The challenge is to approach it as you would a much smaller movie, and not get caught up in the fact that you have $100 million plus to spend, and start thinking about the biggest set pieces you can construct. Rather, focus on the stuff that makes it special and makes an audience invest, and that's the characters. That's in the stuff you don't need a lot of money to do right. That's how we approach The Flash." Daley would then comment, "And it's how we approach Spider-Man too. Our favorite scene that we wrote in the movie was the scene in the car where Michael Keaton is driving Tom Holland to the dance. It was probably the least visual spectacle of the whole film." Miller, now having opinions of his own on the direction of the character, would team up with comics writer Grant Morrison to bash out a rough draft of their own. When later asked about whether or not this was true, Morrison told Collider, "Yeah, I mean, Ezra Miller and I wrote that last year, but it kind of, you know what it's like. It was just one of those things I thought we had a really good version of The Flash, and we wrote it as fast as The Flash because it was so demanding, and it was pretty good. And I think after a few drafts, it would have been great. But the way some studios work, these things just come and go. I think about 15 people have already written versions of The Flash, but it does seem to be going ahead now, but not with the version that we did. I had fun. Ezra came over to the house and we just had a real blast and created the story. And maybe one day the script will leak out into the world. It was pretty good. I mean, I don't know what they're doing with it, but it was pretty good. And it was a very different kind of superhero thing. It was more like Back to the Future, I would say, than a superhero movie." Morrison was asked was it true that Miller wanted to go dark with the film, and was the script darker? He replied, "No, it wasn't really. I mean, elements of darkness were there, and the material that they wanted us to use was the Flashpoint stuff. So Ezra and I were actually trying to do something that was a bit more, like I say, it's kind of like just a great science fiction story. And if you don't know the comics, it would have made sense. But I have to say, I mean, I don't want to talk about that, because somebody else has done their own work on it, and I'm sure it will be great. And maybe, as I say this, will leak out one day and people can judge." Warner Brothers would politely decline the Morrison and Miller script. But it was widely acknowledged that the movie would be taking its cue from the Flashpoint storyline. In July 2019, it was confirmed the search for a director had finally come to an end, and that the director of It, Andy Muschietti, had signed the contract to develop The Flash. Immediately after, Warner would hire Birds of Prey screenwriter Christina Hodson to write a fresh screenplay. Everyone was now happy and everything was locked in place. The film was now slated for release on July 1, 2022, and then moved up to June 3, 2022 due to the chaos caused by the pandemic. Hodson would confirm that the new film will be based on DC Comics' Flashpoint storyline, which will then be used to kickstart a sprawling DC cinematic multiverse. Ezra Miller would then say, "This movie, by opening the door that Flashpoint did in the comic, all of these stories and characters can start to collide." As we now know, Ben Affleck's Batman and Michael Keaton's Batman have filmed scenes in the currently in-production movie, and all that's left for now is for Flash fans to wait just a little longer. And then on November 4th, 2022, we'll get to see the movie that Warner Brothers have been discussing since 1991. Which just goes to show, you've got to forge ahead, keep moving, even if your path isn't lit. Trust that you'll find your way. Thanks for watching.